We've all been seeing these images out of Minnesota, the images of the anti-ICE protests. And alongside those images, I've been seeing on social media, people keep sharing this George Orwell quote over and over again. And the quote is this. The quote is, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command." And I've been interested in how we use culture to process a moment like this one. So I was really, really grateful for the conversation that I had with Lyz Lenz and Jay Smooth and L. Jones to just kind of talk about how culture helps us understand the world that we're in right now. I got a lot out of this conversation. I hope that you do too. Hello to all of you. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hi.
Good morning.
Nice to have you here. Lyz, I want to start with you because this is, again, very much a developing story. We're chatting on Wednesday morning. ICE is partially withdrawing from Minnesota. The Border Patrol official who was leading that operation, Gregory Bavino, is heading home. You were at the Trump rally yesterday in Iowa. Before that, you were in Minneapolis. So listen, lucky to have you here witnessing all of these things in person. What's your read on what's happening right now?
Yeah, it's so crazy, right? Because I go to Minneapolis, and I know a lot of the coverage is focusing on the city itself, but the fear is everywhere. In the suburbs, there's still deportations, and it's like infected this entire city. And it's a city it's very diverse, right? But
Yes.
the belief about Minnesota is that it's this city of nice white people named Kathy Olson. And she's a nice lady. She'll make you a hot dish, right? You'll be like, how many cans, went into making the dish?
Yeah.
It's none of your business. It's hot cheese. You're gonna like it, and that's and so you go there, and it's this very much this. There's fear everywhere, but people are coming together, right? So Trump wants you to believe they're violent agitators, but it's really hard to make people believe that Kathy Olson is a violent agitator. And it's different than what happened with George Floyd, which, a lot of the protesters were people of color. And then you can take images of people of color and do racist things with them and then convince the nice people of Iowa, right, that it's all violent paid agitators. But it's very different when the reality that's being shot with camera is, again, nice white ladies, nice white, ICU nurses who are becoming the targets of this administration. So there's a real rift. And then, you go there and then that reality is so palpable. But then I go to the Trump rally in Clive, Iowa, where it's this closed little building. We had no cell service inside. And nobody wants to talk about Alex Peretti. I tried to ask the people around me about Renee Good. They were not interested, and it was like, and in that closed little world, Trump can say he's popular. Trump can say the borders are closed. He can just say these things, and then everybody claps and applauds and agrees. And so it was this real, diverse reality in a sense.
There's a bit of a rift there in terms of those two worlds.
Yes, absolutely. And it was crazy too, because there were more people protesting outside the event center than
At the
there
Trump
were
rally?
than there were inside the Trump rally. But you wouldn't even know that based upon, the way that people act and the way that narrative is being so tightly controlled.
I think, to me, that's a useful frame because so much of this conversation that I want to have today, because this is a culture show. This is a show that deals with image construction and image analysis. And to me, that's a really good demonstration, actually, of just saying, well, actually, the person who gets to tell the story about the image is the person who controls that story. And so, as I mentioned before, there's been sort of videos recorded by bystanders that have been shared by millions and millions of people. And then you have also Trump administration officials like Stephen Miller, Kristen Noem, and J.D. Vance coming up with radically different interpretations of those. And I just want to play this clip here of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
I heard those words. We remembered, many of us in here in sophomore, when we read it, that the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most important directive. It certainly feels like that in this moment.
So that quote, L, that quote from 1984 from Orwell, I've been sort of seeing that just kind of everywhere, and that's really what made me want to have this conversation. Why do you think people are turning to that quote? What makes it useful in a moment like this one, L?
Well, first of all, I think it's one of the few books we all read because, as you said, we all read it in high school, which has its own irony because our authoritarian high schools that like continually crushed dissent, then continually also fed us these books about like why we should dissent. That was bizarre. But I think so it has a kind of cultural resonance. But I think beyond that, yes, 1984 is a book of fiction, but Orwell was engaged in political critique. He was critiquing specifically what he saw happening under the Stalinist regime in Russia. So what is going on in that book is an act of political criticism. It's not fictionalized. So the same mechanisms he's observing around the ubiquity of surveillance, around the ways that resistance is crushed, around the psychological violence of being part of that kind of society, those methods remain true. They haven't changed through time. They've refined themselves. So we have obviously different kinds of technology. We have different forms of surveillance. We have obviously different weaponry, but the mechanism behind it remains the same. So Orwell was not being prescient so much as he was actually like diagnosing what happens when you live in an imperial capitalist authoritarian state. And I think the final thing I want to say that's important about that quote is what happens to us when we deny the evidence of our ears and eyes. It's not just about looking, it's about how something psychologically is crushed in us when we're asked to deny reality. And this is not, in fact, just a moment. We saw Philando Castile be murdered live on a live stream, and we're told not to trust that. We saw Rodney King beaten under the batons of the LAPD, and they were able to convince a juror that, you know, his twitching body as he writhed under their batons was evidence of him resisting, right? We've for 2 years seen images coming out of Gaza where we've seen the most horrific images live streamed of things like liquefied babies' bodies in plastic bags, and being told that we are not supposed to say anything about that or notice. So this is not something that just arose in this moment. This is a symptom of our culture right now. And I know I said I was going to say one thing, but I'm going to finish with this, that there's a famous French theorist, Jean Baudrillard, and he talks about how in our times, like whatever you want to call it, the postmodern age, there no longer is a distinction between fiction and reality. So he says there's so many levels of reference that take place now that we can actually say that this is real or this is not. Reality and fiction continually feedback with each other. And so we could say here that you know, is there even a possibility for something like political satire when Trump will always go further than your wildest imaginings? When you have police who have grown up watching cops who are now enacting that and also think they're in a Rambo movie and then enact that on our streets, and that becomes reality, where, you know, we have a reality television star as the president that, you know, is now manipulating the media because he understands how media works. Like there isn't this thing anymore. We can just say like, oh, that happened in a book, and this is happening in reality. And perhaps that's why we're turning to things like 1984 to say, like, perhaps it's in that realm that we most get our answers.
Well, so there's two things sort of stick out for me from that answer that you just gave, Al. One is you sort of given the context of what Orwell was actually observing, and you get this from all the greats who've written dystopian literature, right? Like, I mean, like Margaret Atwood's talked about this, Butler's talked about this, the idea that like actually the thing that makes the best dystopian literature is not imagining the world, it's just slightly pulling on the extension of what's happening directly in front of you and saying, no, you already live in that world. That's the thing that sort of makes it a bit more chilling. And then the second thing I wanted to pick up on, this idea of watching footage of people who are acting like they're in a Rambo movie. Jay, I want to go to you on this because it kind of makes sense for people to help find meaning in fiction in sort of ways that help them sort of cope with this reality. But that Rambo thing is also happening, right? There's kind of some chilling examples of this. So here's a footage of ICE agents. They're shooting pepper pellets at protesters, and they were recorded saying this.
It's like Call of Duty. So cool, huh?
So what you saw there is like one of the influencers sort of clipping that clip of ICE agents sort of talking, saying like, it's like Call of Duty. So cool, huh? That's the quote they just heard there. How does that land for you? Like that's the other set of references that are sort of being invoked and used here in real life as we watch this story unfold.
Yeah, it really is striking to see how disconnected these people are from reality and from the reality of it being human beings over there on the other side. But it makes sense when you look at how there are years of decades of propaganda that everyone has been bombarded with to take them to that point. I mean, there's another Orwell quote where he said, totalitarianism in the long run probably demands a disbelief in the very existence of objective truth. And we've seen for at least 10 years now this MAGA version of the right engaging in exactly the kind of brazen maximalist lying that we saw in the aftermath of the killing of Alex Preddy, where they're not telling lies that are even attempting to be plausible relative to what we've already seen in these videos. And the message is, it doesn't matter what's true or false. We're going to say whatever we need to say to win. And if our followers join us in acting like what we say is true, then we get to win and keep exerting dominance and cruelty over the other side. So you see this incentive to just treat everything as if there is no truth and we just get to win. And you combine that with years of propaganda aimed at dehumanizing the people that you've been told are enemies. And you can see that clearly in how they've been talking about Somali people and immigrants writ large, talking about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs. And they're very smart about figuring out how to extend that to other people who stand up as allies to those groups. You know, just like in the 50s and 60s, they would portray white civil rights activists as N-word lovers and stamp them as subhuman by association. They're trying every way to do that with people like Karen Good and Renee Good
and
Alex Preddy, where you see them say, like Fox News will go on TV and tell you that Renee Good had pronouns in her bio as if that is relevant to a discussion of whether it was justified to kill her. That's how low the bar has been set for disconnecting from someone's humanity based on these preposterous culture war ideas that they've put into people's head. So you see the result of all this propaganda bringing people to a place where it's very easy for them to disconnect from the reality of what they're doing and treat it like they're in a video game. And keep in mind also that so much of these current right movements share origins with Gamergate and the video game world. It makes so much sense that they've got this audience base that's ready to disconnect that way.
It always feels jarring to me when I see videos like that and see that, like, for some people, the boundaries between entertainment and real life, they don't actually seem to exist. And I guess, like, there's also the flip side of that, right? Which is to say that sometimes we turn to the books that we read, to the literature that we have, to help us make sense of this moment. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. I'm with L. Jones, Jay Smooth, and Lyz Lenz, and we're taking stock of what's happening in Minnesota and some of the cultural references that people are sort of trying to use to process this moment. I want to take a moment to play you guys a clip from Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart, from earlier this week, as he was sort of reacting to everything that is happening in Minnesota. This is a clip from The Daily Show. Let's just play it right now.
They're lying. We saw it. And that's how brazen they lie when they know we've seen the truth. That's how they lie when they know we know. Imagine how they lie when there's no evidence to contradict them. And maybe that more than anything explains why Alex Preddy really was a threat. Because he was brandishing a weapon. A handheld, aluminum, 1080p, 60 FPS weapon of mass illumination. Because there is nothing more dangerous to a regime predicated on lies than witnesses.
Lyz, I'm interested in that idea. This idea that the idea of having witnesses in this moment actually reframes the entire story as you see it. How do you react to that Jon Stewart clip?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what the activists in Minnesota have been focusing on, bearing witness. And they, and it has to be said, they didn't just invent this, right? Like activists in Chicago kind of fine-tuned this. They've been working with activists in LA. This is America being neighbors with Americans and talking to people so that when it became Minnesota's turn, they were ready. And their focus, yes, has always been about alerting and bearing witness. And that does shift the narrative. And because even if, right, like they're saying that is a lie, this is a lie, everybody's a paid agitator, it becomes harder and harder to hold and control that narrative when there's so much evidence to the contrary.
Right.
And it becomes a lot harder. And I wanted to point out something that Elle mentioned that I think was so wise and smart, but they brought up the idea of the Soviet Union and Orwell writing out of the Soviet Union, which Stalin digitally altered pictures. Like this has been going on for years, right? Like this is like a very famous thing he used to do. And that was, you know, while he was murdering millions and disappearing his own people from the evidence and from the record. And so, you know, this is a tradition of how totalitarianism works. But there's also, I think, a clash now happening in that narrative control. And I think that's one of the reasons Trump went to Iowa. He went to a place that he thought would be safe, you know, to try to get back out there to regain that narrative. And I think it's interesting to see the ways in which the narratives are clashing, right? Like the fiction versus the reality, because even in that Trump rally, there were multiple, like I said, there were more protesters outside, which is very not Iowans. Like Iowans
Right.
are not.
That's an unusual
like,
thing. You normally expect that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We're not a protesting kind of people. And it's also really cold.
Yeah.
Like even less than our Minnesota neighbors,
Yeah.
which is, you know, 250 miles away, which is a short trip if you're a Midwesterner. You
Right.
know, I know other parts of the country that feels inaccessible, but for us, that's just a little car trip, little day trip. And, you know, but like the ways in which those narratives are clashing. And so when I was there, the man next to me was like really weird. And I kind of got nervous. I was like, what is he up to? Because he was like really sweaty and kind of smelly and like acting very nervous. But he ended up like taking off his flannel and revealing a shirt that said liar. He was protesting. You know, I was like, oh, thank God. This is not how I die today, which I'm being a little flip, but
gosh.
also is
That's
like
a thing you have to think about. Yeah, that's
you do. And so he gets hauled away almost immediately. And then there's two other protesters who had come into the room and started shouting and heckling Trump. They were taken away immediately. And when I was reading news caps, like recaps of that event, I read that the local reporters, God bless, were saying, and then the crowd, you know, spontaneously erupted in chants of USA, USA. Well, they were doing that to drown out the hecklers. So there's like, you know, so it's like these narratives are clashing, and it's becoming harder and harder, I think, for Trump to control the nature of reality. And in places, you know, although he has spent years and years telling people not to believe fake news. So, you know, there is that foundation as well.
Well, so as we sort of work through this, right, like you keep returning to images and recordings, because that's really what we have is like we have the evidence of your eyes and ears and as much sort of as you can take in. Elle, I think I'm a bit more used to a world where those images matter, right? Those images matter and they change something about the nature of the conversation. It wasn't that long ago that the images of Alan Kurdi, the little boy who washed up on the shore, kind of changed the narratives in this country. They changed something about the number of Syrian refugees who were led into Canada. I think I'm trying to wrap my mind around whether it's still easy to scroll past images as we see them, you know, online or not. And how does this moment sort of change your understanding of the power of images, or does it change your understanding of the power of images?
Well, Black people have been talking about this for a while, right? Going back to, for example, Sadia Hartman talks about this in her writing, that on the one hand, we go, okay, if we watch this violence, we become witnesses, and then in theory, it motivates us towards this action, then we resist and everything changes. But in reality, often it can desensitize us. So the question is always asked, like, what does it mean when you see an endless flow of violence? Does it actually say, okay, now it's time to resist? Like, does it motivate us? Does it cohere us? Or does it, in many cases, actually contribute to us the very objectification, dehumanization that we might think that we're working against? So if we constantly see images of dead children, if we constantly, and just day after day after day, if we are constantly confronted with numbers from this massacre and that massacre, then are we able to actually process that, or do we become desensitized to things? And is it just become part of reality and one more thing? So I think about like the images of Abu Ghraib, right? Like that was a huge thing in the Iraq War. That was in the news cycle for
So
ages.
the prisoners' images of Abu Ghraib.
Right, the torture in Iraq, like one of the black site prisons. That was a big scandal.
Yeah.
There's 100 Abu Ghraibs. Like that happens every day now. And it's like a mere blip. And then we move on to the next thing. There's such an overwhelm. So I think there's always this question with that question of witnessing is like, when does looking matter? How does looking motivate us to action? And can looking sometimes actually be a problem? Does it help us dehumanize each other? Does it help us actually de-empathize? Does it actually leave us unmoored in some sense that we just don't know what to do, and we actually become, so a lot of people are like, I'm not engaging with the news anymore because I turn on the news and I just see these horrible things and I don't know what to do with them. So looking without organization, without the ability, and we've been hearing a lot from Lyz about this important thing that's also happening. Unless you have people organized in order to respond to that looking, it can actually become, I think, even more disorienting for people. And then we get all these narratives around paid actors and, like, oh, everybody in this tragedy is an actor, and people actually just like entering into this realm of disinformation.
Well, it creates confusion, right? It creates confusion.
I mean, we have AI images being created now by the right of Alex Purdy, right? Like where they're sending those around and people can't even, and it doesn't even matter. As being said, it doesn't matter what the truth is. You just put it out there and you force people to debunk it. And that takes more energy. And in the amount of energy you have to fact check those next 100 lies, another 100 lies have come in and they've already served their purpose, right? So
Jay, let me ask you the same question. I mean, like, I think of you as someone who's sort of like made a career of taking specific moments and distilling them and saying, I need you to pay attention to this specific thing that is happening in this sort of larger scale thing. But as you sort of like scroll, as we sort of deal with this infinite scroll, images used to, I think, stop us more in our tracks than they do now. How do you think about this idea of the power of the image? Is it waning? Is it maybe returning in some kind of sense? Where are you at with this?
That's tough. I mean, I think it's moving in multiple directions at once, as I think people have said. I mean, I think when you look at the imagery they're putting out there, like I don't know if we're gonna look at this meme of Bovino that they put out there, but there's this clip that they've been propagating of Bovino sort of dressed as some sort of supervillain from a Zack Snyder adaptation of a Lenny Riefenstahl movie with this big jacket.
The New York Times ran a piece on the jacket that he was wearing about the idea that it was like sort of supposed to like call to mind like a sort of like a Nazi era kind of jacket.
Yeah. And it's like it's imagery that's tapping into something that I really think is embedded deep in the psyche of people, where once you have convinced them to have this fear and loathing for this enemy group that you see as subhuman, you can capitalize on that by feeding into their appetite, not just for a hero who will protect them, but like a supervillain that will exert dominance and cruelty on their behalf. And I think we're seeing imagery, both real and fabricated, that's tapping into that and manipulating people into rooting for more imagery that'll feed into that. I saw this incredible clip last night of the right-wing grifter Tim Pool saying, well, people keep saying, I'm a bootlicker, but what you don't understand is that's my boot. I voted for that boot. And that means I'm wearing the boot and I'm the one stomping on people's necks. And I thought that was an incredible insight into the psyche of these people who feel so weak and insecure that they want to be the cruel supervillain vicariously through these leaders. And I think we're seeing a lot of imagery that taps into that. That Bovino clip, it's accompanied by this techno music that almost makes it sound like it's meant to be whimsical. So there's another message at the same time that nothing is real. Everything is just a meme. And the ultimate victory over our enemies is to successfully troll and trigger them. So there's all these levels to people detaching from their humanity and finding pleasure in the theater of dominance and cruelty over them.
This idea of demonstrating the imagery of cruelty and expecting no consequences, I think has been a consistent theme for some time. But we actually are seeing, at least from the last couple of days, is the Trump administration recalibrating, maybe, question mark, and trying to sort of like pull back some of this. And one of the ways that they've been doing that is like, in addition to sort of ICE sort of staging this partial withdrawing from Minnesota, is they've been having the First Lady, Melania Trump, weighing in. She's on the promotional tour for her new documentary directed by Brett Ratner, which is in theaters on Friday, by the way. Have a listen to this clip right here.
I'm calling for unity. I'm against the violence. So if you protest in peace. And we need to unify in this time.
I'm calling for unity. Melania Trump, the woman who famously wore that jacket, "I really don't care, do you?" at an immigration detention center. That was back in 2018. What do you think Orwell would make of that clip from Melania?
I mean, first of all, she's blaming the protesters. Like, let's just be so for real about, like, if I condemn the violence, meaning she condemns the violence that she believes the protesters are, inciting and doing, and that everybody needs to calm down. So it's a real, hey, ladies, let's stop being hysterical moment from a woman, right? And the Trump administration is so good at using that, that voice of a conservative woman to talk, to kind of soften the image of what is happening. And Melania is an incredible figure to do this on, because she is so clear. Everything that she does supports her husband. And if you read her book, which I did, I'm still, traumatized from it. But
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. But she stands by him. Like, she has no regrets about wearing that jacket. It was a pointed statement. Like, it was a cruel statement, and she stands by it. And her statement about the George Floyd protests is she thought that they were disgusting paid agitators and they should have calmed down. And she doesn't understand why everybody needs to get so upset all the time. And so she's back out here but the way that we see her, because she is beautiful, because she projects whiteness, she becomes this kind of way that people project onto her. And so it's even hard to see her clearly, even though she's so clear about who she is and what she does. Culturally, as a symbol, she's a little bit more muddied, because, people want her to be this victim of the Trump administration. They want her to be this kind of more, there's more, complexity there where there really isn't. And so I think in a way she is very effective in that kind of softening moment, and that, and that she is, but she is so clear on who she is and what she is about and how she supports. But you've seen the Free Melania memes.
I have. Yeah.
Yeah. And because people are like, oh, she's a beautiful lady, she must be a victim here, rather than completely complicit. And we see that narrative happening over and over again. So it goes back to that point of there are images, there are people telling you who they are, but we don't listen to that reality because we don't want it to be true.
Well, and to that end, we're sitting here talking a couple of days before the documentary about her that was made for $50 million or bought for $50 million by Amazon comes out in theaters. There is something to be said about, I don't actually think Orwell would go that far as to say here's a tech company that is so interested in aligning itself with Donald Trump. And also, by the way, one of the things they've done is they spent $50 million on this documentary that is going to come out in theaters. Elle, last word to you. What's your read on Melania Trump calling for unity?
Yeah, there's another famous Orwell story, Shooting an Elephant, which is about him being a reluctant servant of empire, and he is called, the villagers are like, oh, there's this rampaging elephant, it's your job, go out there. And he says this phrase, you wear the mask and your face grows to meet it. And I think that's so much what we see. I mean, what Trump also does is he has his ability that goes beyond what we've said with Orwell is he will make you show that complete fealty and obedience and then throw you under the bus once you've embarrassed yourself and reverse on you, right? So part of this is Trump leaving his options open. And we saw this from Catherine Levitt, right? When she got up on the podium and was kind of like, oh, I don't know, like that's Christian, no, that's not Trump. So this is what Trump does, is he forces you to come out and defend the most disgusting, inhumane, ridiculous things, to tell the most brazen lies. And then when you've done that, Trump himself will turn around and be like, yeah, I'm actually on the other side now. And so he's always preserving that position for himself to have multiple realities. And I think that's what we're seeing here, that Melania is preserving this space for Trump to now condemn ICE if he needs to, and then act like he's the more reasonable one. And so this is what we constantly see, is when you have created this regime and you put yourself in that position where you've shown loyalty to Trump, you will go down with your face in that mask. And that's, and that will include his wife if it needs to, So I think what we're seeing is Melania just running that cover.
We started this conversation sort of reminding ourselves that like that Orwell quote is sort of being shared everywhere. I think when I start to see that, when I start to see an image or a quote or some kind of idea sort of being reshared and reshared, that means there's something about that is helping people sort of process that moment. I want to end with some recommendations, maybe a novel, maybe a film, maybe a TV show that's maybe helping you process and understand the moment that we're in right now. Jay, why don't I start with you briefly?
Man, I think I would recommend reconnecting with our humanity through art and music by watching Prince's concert movie, Sign of the Times. I think a beautiful representation of the Minneapolis Black music scene and this diverse world in Minneapolis that came out of. And I think that humanity is so strong that we connect with through music. I have to believe, looking at this fear and loathing being manipulated by people who are just acting in cynical self-interest, like Melania and her husband, I have to believe that our courage and our commitment to that humanity, as we keep showing up like people have been in Minneapolis, I have to believe that's going to be stronger in the long run. And I think Sign of the Times movie is a good example of that sustenance that brings our humanity back.
Elle Jones, what do you got? What do you want to recommend?
Two. One is quite obscure. It's this British series, A Very British Coup. So I don't know how findable it is, but it's about how, this like left-wing socialist Labour government comes to power and the way that everybody schemes to like basically force him out. So it's another great satire and example of how the political system works. Yeah. It's from the 90s, I believe. And then similar to Jay, I'm going to say Amandla, Revolution in 4-Part Harmony, which is about the freedom songs in South Africa. So I think we have to remind ourselves, we're talking about the very stark brutality and dehumanization and cruelty that we see, but we have to believe we have the power to organize against it. And, these are people, they were murdered, but they were murdered while defending their neighbors, right? And so Amandla is about that power through song. So throughout the apartheid system, how Black South Africans consistently found in music the power to resist.
Lyz Lenz, take us home, pal. What do you got?
All right, I got 3 recommendations. The first one is go volunteer and feed your neighbors. I think so much despair that happens because we're staring at our screens and we're not connecting with people. And if you can sign up for Meals on Wheels, if you can do one thing that is tangible and in person for your community, to be like the people in Minnesota where they're showing up, they're doing diaper drives, they're paying the rent for their neighbors. That I think will combat the despair. The 2 books that I have found very useful in this moment is, the first is Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Maree Brown. She has this beautiful passage that I think about all the time, how we are in an imagination war. And it sometimes feels like we're trapped in the imagination of these violent white fascists. And so we have to, in order to get ourselves out, we have to imagine a better world and redefine how they're, these are not violent protesters. This is Kathy Olson, right? Like that's an imagination war. And I think about her book, and I've reread it a couple times already in the past 6 months. And then the third book is Milan. It's going to make me sound insufferable, but Milan Kundera. You're going to say Melania. Please read Melania's book. It was so well written. I learned so much. No, it actually reads like it was written by like some weird AI bot. It's so bad. but it's bad and then you get mad. So please don't read it.
I won't read it. Got it.
I'll say Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera, or The Book of Laughter and Forgetting. Milan Kundera was a Czechoslovakian writer who was writing out of the Soviet Union, and he writes these just beautiful books that also are very illuminating in the ways that like authoritarianism kind of tries to crush our humanity, but we're still having good sexy times all the time. So that's my unintelligent take on Milan Kundera, but I find that book, those two books, to be very, very helpful.
I love all of these recommendations, and I've just been so grateful for this very conversation. Thank you guys so much for doing this. Thanks for coming on the show today. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Elle Jones is a poet and assistant professor at the Department of Politics at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax. Jay Smooth is a hip-hop broadcaster and culture critic in New York City. And Lyz Lenz is an author based in Iowa. She's currently writing a book about the politics of the Midwest. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. We'd love to see you then.